I'm going to talk about sustainability, but in the context of the whole idea of resetting. How does one go about resetting? So, in a way, my talk is going to be about three different things that we look at when we do any kind of design or planning exercise. So, we look at balance. Balance basically is about um, stability, equity, equality. How do we bring balance into the buildings that we're designing? We look for harmony. Harmony, in a way, we can talk about is tranquility and accord, but also kind of harmony between textures, colors, building materials, and spaces. And of course, inclusivity. And inclusivity is very, very important because the most balanced and harmonious built environment is still kind of dead or inanimate, I would say, if it is not inclusive. And inclusive in all sense, both in terms of the animate and the inanimate. Looking further at how these three pillars on which the built environment is balanced on, it is like between balance and harmony. When you create a certain overlap of balance and harmony, you achieve a sense of well-being. And similarly, between inclusivity and harmony, when there is an overlap that is very synchronized and converging, there's a feeling of connectedness. And between balance and inclusivity, it is restorative. And when you bring all these qualities together in a tangible and intangible way, bringing them into a certain fluid motion where color, texture, building material, and other things just flow into each other, you naturally come to a state of being where sustainability becomes inevitable. I'm going to illustrate that using three different projects. Each project embodies one of these qualities: balance, harmony, and inclusive. So going to the first one, it is a housing project which is all about balance between earth and air, fire and water. And what we try to do in this project is to find a way that the built spaces in which the people are living and the open spaces outside, between the temperature, humidity, and wind movement, which is very, very important, especially when you build in a climate like coastal Tamil Nadu, which is South India. How do people achieve a certain balance of indoor-outdoor spaces with very little use of energy? How do you achieve a balance between light and shade, between comfort and temperature? And in this project, we tried our best to say that everything between the indoor-outdoor spaces, between the spaces used individually in a private manner by a person and spaces used collectively, to bring a certain balance so that there is harmony among the residents. And then we went further to look at balance among the building materials. And in almost all our projects, our building materials, the colors and the textures and the tones are emerging out of the natural material itself. When we use a lot of earth, depending on where we are taking the earth from, where we are building, the earth tones can be anything from light yellows to ochres to burnt amber, and offset with exposed concrete, recycled wood, mesh, recycled stone. And to find a balance between all these different materials, whether it's virgin or recycled, earth tones, cement tones, wood, and metal. So the next project that I would talk about is harmony. And in harmony, we are looking at a completely different range of things. In harmony, when we talk about harmony, we're talking about harmony between built and unbuilt spaces, but actually harmony between the individual and the space itself. Harmony between light and shade, harmony between the proportions of the space to the user. This is a project that is a Center for Indian Studies, Indian Cultural Center, sorry. where we tried to find a harmony between textures, which is use of natural material like stone, where there's recycled stone in the walls and virgin stone in the floors, between polished stones and unpolished stone. Because see, most of the time in climate like we have in South India, people walk barefoot inside the buildings. We leave our footwear outside because in tropical climates, between dust and mud and insects, you try to find a certain sense of hygiene and sanitation. And so you increase the feeling of tactile perception also through the sole of the feet. So use of material and color on the floor is extremely important because it gives you a sense of connectedness to your space. So the harmony is not just in terms of the visual sense of space, but also in terms of textures that you touch and walk on and feel and sit on. And all the openings and the apertures that let in light, how it is treated, the harmony between the harsh light outside and the muted light inside, and how that is perceived through the inner eye of the being gives a certain feeling of well being and comfort. And so, harmony in terms of texture, colors, material, light, and shade, and especially in tropical climates, is very important to get a sense of well being. Like, for example, when we look at the way the texture and the color is interpreted during the day as the sun moves between sunrise and sunset, the amount of humidity in the air varies. So the color of the material keeps changing. And how do you play with that using textures and the metabolic functions that you use in the space? A space that where you have high level of physical activity is very well ventilated because the body gives off heat. It needs to cool down. Spaces where you have low metabolic activity, where there's muted shades that are restful, and it calls in an inner going into yourself to find the center. This also connects in a way to sustainability because when you look at actual material textures and colors, one of the most amazing things is non-industrialized materials. They're very colors that are in nature, how you use it into the spaces that you build, how you integrate the intrinsic feeling of well-being that comes from using natural materials, which also makes it sustainable because you have low embodied energy. By having natural lighting and ventilation, you have low operative energy. By recycling of materials and using them how they're found in nature, you have very low energy being spent between mining, assembling, and constructing with it. So, in a way, almost everything between the science, the art, and the perception can be interlinked through a cycle of the designer, the user, and the context of climate and culture. And this is very, very interesting because the more you get into a cyclic sense of designing, the more you move very harmoniously into a sustainable built environment. So you can see that within the spaces, because there's no difference between the inside and the outside, except to keep out the insects by a mesh, you have a feeling of the nature coming inside without it actually imposing on you with all the other aspects of nature. You create a feeling of well being with fresh air and light, while you are also in tune and interacting with the outside. The last project that I would like to present is a school building. It's a kindergarten for children between the age of 2 and 7. And it's quite a special kindergarten, and I wanted to use it as a project that demonstrates inclusivity. Again, it's a project that is built with taking into account the climate, the context, the users, here it's children, and the entire aspect of how you bring in building materials, space, proportions, colors, textures into a certain convergence to create a space that is constantly evolving with the users. For example, the children in the school come from about 60 different countries of the world, including local children from the villages inside. We have Russians, Koreans, Japanese, we have the European countries, North America, South America, and the African countries, to create spaces for these children who are brought up in different cultures and ethnic groups when they are within a school, to make the space so accessible that everything can be touched, can be used, can be experimented with, while allowing for constant flow of light and air, so that the children are at all points of time in tune with the natural climate. And this helps them to explore their spaces, be playful, learn about each other, learn about the environment, learn about going beyond fear and being really adventurous, innovative, and experimental. And each of the spaces flow into each other. The foundations, the walls, and the floor are made of earth. And the roof is just normal terracotta tiles. And we tried each time that the color of all these materials emerge very naturally within the building material technology. So we don't disguise it, we don't try to put any admixtures, that the color keeps changing with the natural daylight and allows the user to experiment with whatever is there. And only the surfaces which are like with veneer or had needed paints, we contrasted it. We contrasted to the earth tones so that we bring in a kind of pastel, fresh, atmospheric sense of color and texture to all the earth tones that are in the material. We went further that we have with the skylights and the roof level ventilation to play with air and temperature in a manner that as the day gets hotter and hotter towards midday of the school, the air starts rising up towards the roof and the light gets stronger through the skylights. So you have a feeling of both heat and air getting a bit extreme, and that allows you to know what time of the day it is, so that the children learn and are in tune with the climate. And every part of the building is accessible, like I told you. They have their own little storage spaces, they can play with different types of toys, they can leave it around, they can have the freedom to actually work together as teams. And this makes all these spaces inclusive. Inclusive to a point that you have a feeling that they take ownership of it and they adapt it as they play, and the space responds. So this inclusiveness is between both the animate and the inanimate. The spaces, instead of being over designed, are actually designed to be constantly changing with the user. And this allows a high degree of responsiveness. And responsiveness comes when spaces are inclusive, when spaces allows the user not just to be in it, but adapt it and adapt with it. And after all, sustainability is about adaptation. Sustainability is about being responsive. Sustainability is about finding a certain balance between and balance without, balance with nature and balance with society. And between this balance and inclusivity, finding a certain harmony of being allows one to move away from imitative consumerism to something which is more conscious consumerism, to something which is more conscious living. And the minute you are in the cycle of conscious living, in balance, harmony, and inclusivity, there is a well being that calls for a certain sense of sustainability. And that is what we try to achieve with all our projects. Thank you very much.